Hello and welcome everybody to another month's edition of The Wellness Policy. My name is Wai Ting, back again for a brand new year of The Wellness Policy, and joined with me as always, our man Neal Flanagan. What's going on, our man?
Hello, Way. How are you? It's been a rough week in wrestling news this week. I think, given the topic we're going to talk about today, that I got behind the wheel today and felt a tiny bit anxious just with that in the back of my mind, So, but otherwise, a good week. Weather apart, it's been living up to the Irish stereotype: wind, rain, dark at 4 o'clock.
Absolutely, yes. We appreciate you joining us at your. I can never really figure out UK time. I never really.
It's always perfect for me. It's 7 p.m. So I've had my dinner. My work day is finished. It's great.
Lovely. And of course, joining the both of us as always, Jordan Goodman. How you doing, Jordan?
Yes. Hello. I'm doing. I just want to say at the top of this show, thank you, Wai, and thanks to John for including me at the start of your AEW Dynamite review show last night. It was meaningful. It was difficult. I'm still feeling a lot, but I'm grateful to be a part of this community. So again, thank you for allowing me the platform to share my thoughts and feelings about Jamin.
Well, thank you so much for offering, honestly. For those of you who of course, didn't listen last night, Jordan joined us on Rwanda Dynamite just to kind of share some of his thoughts through his experiences working with and being a fan of Jay Briscoe. So I encourage everybody to go check that out. Yeah, it's not been an easy week, I think, for, any longtime wrestling fan, certainly. I also appreciate maybe having, a community like this to be able to just really kind of talk about how we're feeling. And I think that's, maybe what we'll be looking to do here. But of course, Jordan, this is a very special edition of the show. It's our first one of the year. It's been one that we've been trying to work on for a long time. And we have a very special guest. Would you like to introduce him for us?
I'd love to. Also, Neal, I didn't realize you're Irish. Interesting. But today's not about you. You might see I'm drinking out of my Periphery mug. Today, our guest is the drummer of the band Periphery, an amazing band that is incredibly active right now and will be in the coming months. But more importantly, our guest is a dear friend of mine and a former co-host of a podcast. We could talk maybe a bit about that as well in this chat. Let's bring him in. His name is Matthew. His last name is Halpern. Matt Halpern, welcome to The Wellness Policy.
Thank you very much. What's up, guys?
Hey, man.
You feeling anxious today?
No, I'm good. I'm good right now, actually, which is nice for sure.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, Matt and I, we've been friends for many, many years. And when we hang out, often we talk about our lives. And part of our lives includes our emotions. And for me, anxiety is something that has been ever present. Sometimes it's a bit more distressing and sometimes it's a bit more typical. But I know Matt has had his own experiences of anxiety as well, and has been very brave and articulate in the ways he's expressed it, both personally and more publicly. And it's a chat we have not yet had in the few years we've done this project. And Matt, I thank you for being willing to join us today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's an important topic. I think everybody deals with it on some level. But it's definitely been something that I've had to really wrap my both arms around and legs and try to figure out over the past couple years, specifically, more so than any other point in my life, I would say. So very much in it, if that makes sense.
So when you say wrap your arms and legs, I start thinking about a newer hobby that you introduced into your life more recently. It's something that Wai has had experience with. So maybe let's just start there, just as far as you've grown as an adult and trying to find new ways to engage in life. Ultimately, that is like healthy for you and can be an opportunity for you to cope with big feelings.
Yeah. Well, you're referring to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. which has been, I mean, it's the best medicine I've ever taken. And it's also the most addicting medication out there. I know Wai, you want to talk about this a good bit, but
I'd love to.
I mean,
Yeah.
part of the reason why, you asked, am I anxious today? No, because I trained and I rolled for 2 hours earlier this morning. And there's nothing like it. There's nothing just from a workout standpoint. I mean, working out is amazing for your mind just as much as it is for your body. But that type of workout is second to none. Like, I haven't found anything else that even comes close, and I've done a lot of working out, tried a lot of different things, like a lot of different modalities. Obviously, you had that ridiculous picture of me in the ice bath when we started this. That was, getting in the ice was something that I was doing and still do very much so for a lot of reasons. One of which was to, help recenter my mind and tackle anxiety. But there's been nothing that even remotely compares to the type of presence and the type of engagement that you get physically and mentally with BJJ. And if I just can't recommend it enough to people. And I just started recently. It's only been a matter of months since I've been doing it. And I jumped in and I felt that day one, and it was, sign me up. I'm doing this 5-6 days a week, and I have been ever since. There's just no way that now I could live without it, I don't think.
So for those unaware, Matt is an extremely accomplished musician. And I think that's really understating it. But the fact that you've gravitated towards jiu-jitsu is something that I'm not that surprised by, because I think it's an art form that is so easy to translate from musicianship, and music. It's all about repetition and getting that technique perfectly down. Just doing it slow and then speeding it up and then doing it fast, and it's just, and then when you're rolling, it's as if you're playing live, and
Playing
there's
the
no
show.
ability, exactly. And and we've talked a lot about flow states, Jordan, you and I, and you're just locked in because somebody is pressuring against you. You don't have time to stop and think. You're just in the moment, and at the end of that 5-minute rolling session, you're just like, you feel like relaxed because you've been so focused and on this one thing this entire time. So I'm so happy to hear that you found that outlet.
Thank you. Yeah, man, there's nothing like it. And I would recommend it to anybody who's curious at all. I mean, there's so many benefits to it on top of just what I'm gaining from it from a mental standpoint, just in relation to the anxiety side. But like, it's great for an active mind. It's great if you're looking to get involved in an artistic form of physicality that really offers so many, and it's just endless. Like, there's so many different paths you can go down with it. Community is a huge thing that I've found through it. I've made a bunch of new friends, people that I can confidently say I will be very close with physically and also just as friends, but literally physically through the practice itself for a long time going forward. God willing, I can keep doing this. But you're right. As a musician, it's going back a second. I was thinking about this over the past week, and I was trying to talk to my wife about it. But I started in September, and I don't even remember why. Meaning I don't remember what propelled me to just find this particular gym, go there and start training. I don't know what it was, because previously I've never taken the leap to do something like this, because I always had the excuse of, I don't want to do martial arts because I don't want to get injured, and these are my livelihood. My body is my livelihood. And that was always my excuse. And it's funny because I wish I had started 10 years ago or more. You know, I wish I had started when I did have opportunities previously. When I have some friends that do it locally. One friend in particular, who his name is Brian. He's a second-degree black belt. He's been doing it for 17 years. Dude, he was trying to get me to do this back when he started. You know, and it's just thinking about, oh man, had I started then, you know,
never too late.
Never too late, right? It's better to start now than never at all. But it's just been something that has definitely become a daily pillar, I guess, in my routine. To the and I'll shut up in a second, but like to the point where like we're going on tour in about a month or so, a little over a month, and I'm planning on bringing mats to roll at the venues. My drum tech is a blue belt in BJJ, so we'll be at least working together every day. I'm going to book privates or book, you know, drop-in sessions, but it's something that there's no negotiating at this point. It's got to be part of the majority of my week, you know, if not every day is the goal.
He's deep into it, everybody. Yeah, it's that addictive. And it's like, I mean, how often I certainly never get that excited about working out. So but this is fun. It's not, it doesn't even really feel like you're doing the rest. So.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely want to just I wanted to vomit plenty of times between today and yesterday, between the rolls that I did and you know, the work that you put in. But it's amazing to get yourself to that point and then fight through it. And again, that's the mental challenge, you know. It's I don't know. So there's a lot that I'm learning through this new art form that has helped me with the anxiety, at least, even if it's a dose kind of thing per day that I'm able to take, that allows my mind to be a little bit more clear. It's not the only thing out there for me or for others, but it's certainly something that I found, and I'm so grateful that I found it, because it's been life-changing.
That's great, man. If there's anything I know about you, it's if you get lit up or energized by something, like, you go fucking deep into it. I mean, that's just part of who you are that has allowed you to become literally a world-class drummer. And I've seen that with other things throughout our friendship. One of the things I've always admired about you. So at this point, like, we kind of started with, we jumped into, here's one type of modality or activity that is enjoyable and beneficial in all kinds of ways. One of those ways is it's a coping mechanism for stress and anxiety. There's plenty of them. I'm sure all four of us, whether we realize it or not, engage in these things daily, or at least throughout our lives. But maybe if we just step back and just briefly, like, do a quick overview, like, what is anxiety and the different types of anxiety. And then maybe if we're willing, we could all share our experiences or not throughout our lives and the ways in which we relate to this stuff. So anxiety is, it can represent a lot of things. And I think it's important to realize that anxiety can, and oftentimes is adaptive and healthy. If there is a truly anxious situation that we are experiencing in life, then it would be a healthy, optimal response to feel anxiety. So to just naturally equate anxiety as bad, even if it's uncomfortable, not necessarily always bad. What might be bad is if we are in a truly anxious situation and we're not feeling bothered much at all. So there is a difference between anxiety, experiencing or feeling anxiety, versus an anxiety disorder. When we're talking about any type of psychological disorder, then at that point there is significant distress that is creating dysfunction in our lives, interpersonally, work, in our own experience of ourselves, and so on. But when we're talking about anxiety, it can be tricky because there's so many ways in which we can describe it or relate to it. So it can be more cognitive. So if we're cognitively experiencing anxiety, many of us have worries or often fears about something in the future, or stressed out, anxious more in our heads and in our thinking and our beliefs. But anxiety can also be incredibly physical. So many people who experience anxiety this way, shortness of breath, Sweaty palms, heart racing is very common, tightness throughout the body, and so on. And we can also feel just anxious more interpersonally, right? So maybe if we're in a relationship, whether it's more personal or professional, if we're feeling some sort of stress or tension or fear, then we can have anxious ways of relating to other people as well. So an incredibly brief, quick overview, but I think it's helpful to at least get a sense of what we're dealing with in this conversation, what we're talking about. Anxiety can be many things, and all four of us could have anxious experiences, and yet they could all be completely different experiences. So Neal, we haven't heard from you yet, aside the fact that it rains where you live, apparently.
Yes.
So if you're willing, I'm just wondering, when you think of anxiety throughout the course of your life, what comes to mind?
Well, as you mentioned, an entire range of things from 5 minutes before this show goes live every month. No matter how much I'm getting used to doing it, there's a certain level of kind of performance anxiety, for want of a better term, which is normal. And I think you guys, and I'm talking really to you, Jordan, and you particularly, Matt, as our special guest, you know, people who are talking of performance anxiety, people who are on stage in front of an audience. And, you know, a lot of people I think out there might think, well, gosh, those guys must be outgoing and wouldn't be socially anxious ever, you know, that kind of thing. And of course, you only have to hear stories of actors throwing up before they go on stage and so on. I'm sure that's the same for musicians as well, to know that that's not true. But to go back to myself, I had an issue with social anxiety for quite a while that required, or at least was part of what I was dealing with in psychotherapy, because it got to the point where I wouldn't go to crowded areas like shopping malls. I wouldn't go to shows, wrestling shows, music shows, because I would inevitably leave after about half an hour of feeling deeply uncomfortable. And it's perhaps a different area. And Jordan, you can guide us here, I think, with your expertise. But I had one occasion that I can really latch on to, which was, I think, by all accounts from what I've read, a panic attack, which is something else, something distinct from a general state of anxiety, where I felt the world stop. You know, I was sitting in an open plan office in work and felt dissociated from everything around me, even my own identity to an extent. I don't know if people out there are going to relate to this at all. Hopefully some people will, but just feeling completely frozen in place. If someone had shouted my name at that point, I wouldn't have responded, and just heart racing, a deep sense of panic, of dread. And then 10 minutes later, it had gone away. And I got up from my seat and went away outdoors for a walk. So yes, from those extremes to the anxiety that we all probably should, because it helps us to perform our duties in life, whether it's performing or whether it's just sitting at the office. And, you know, a little bit of anxiety is normal and probably productive. That's my experience.
Yeah. I relate to the experience of a panic attack. The first time that happened for me, I was 14, I believe, or 13. And because it had never happened before, like, I literally thought I was dying. Mm-hmm. And often when these episodes of panic or really intense pointed anxiety occur, it feels like we are out of control. And many people report what you reported, Neal, where it almost feels like what's like reality to you is not what's happening in that moment. So some people, it's like a depersonalization type of an effect. Certainly not feeling grounded. Oftentimes with experiences like that, like the nervous system is almost like just like in a hyper gear, where it's hard to catch our breath, maybe crying, a lot of emotional experience, sweating, sometimes trembling, and so on. Again, all these different host of symptoms, there's no right or wrong in the sense that different people can have panic attacks and it's their own unique experience of it. But oftentimes, to your point, it's not that long lasting. 10 minutes, you had mentioned. And about the same for me when I start to kind of feel like I'm coming back down to earth. And I think it's helpful to share this because for those who experience it, especially if it's a newer experience for you, like it's fucking scary and it's weird and it doesn't feel normal. And we often feel like we're crazy. Some of us, because the experience feels so out of control, as if we might appear to believe we're crazy. And so if we're having something as extreme like panic attacks, yes, I would absolutely suggest that is something worth looking into with a medical and or mental health professional. But these things don't define us. They're just experiences that we may experience. And perhaps there's good reason for these things to occur. Maybe as I share a bit more, I can share a bit more about my own insight into maybe why my anxiety has developed over the years. But I'm curious, Wai. I know in the past, I believe you've said at least once or twice, I've heard like, you're not an anxious person in general. If I'm right in saying that, I'm wondering what you mean by that.
I feel like I need a better like understanding of clinical anxiety, or at least like what I don't, maybe the subject of this particular podcast might be, versus just the feeling of anxiousness and nervousness, because I would assume a lot of people, most people probably feel nervous at some point in their lives, but what separates that from, you know, something that might require a bit more intervention?
Well, again, if we're talking about something that would classify as a disorder, it's something that negatively impacts our life. It's creating real distress in our life. So for instance, someone with social anxiety, if it's really difficult and distressing to go to work because you're around people, and you know, someone like this would probably be stuck in their head, maybe ruminating at night. It's hard to fall asleep. So now we're interfering with sleep because worried about what might happen interpersonally the next day. When they're in the room, feeling like, is everyone looking at me? Is everyone judging me? Am I going to say something stupid? And then if we're having these thoughts, well, then our heart might start racing. Our palms may get sweaty. Our mouth might get dry. And so that's just one example of how anxiety can play out in a person's life. But the punchline is really there's a significant distress or impairment in just our everyday life
that limits you from, you know, accomplishing your daily tasks.
Or even if you're doing what you need to do, if it's like a fucking struggle just to do it, well, then like life's not that great. If we're really like working against ourselves day in and day out, that I think would classify as at least what we could diagnose as an anxiety disorder. And then, you know, that could open us up to a variety of treatments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess judging by that definition, I'm grateful that, you know, I haven't been afflicted by anxiety to a significant degree that it's prevented me from, you know, being able to go on air and do a podcast, for instance. But, you know, obviously it doesn't mean that I don't have my moments where I am extremely nervous about the subjects that I'm about to talk about. I would say, like, you know, my stresses are more to do with like my own sort of like continued lifelong assessment of like my self-worth, you know, and what I bring to the business in comparison to, you know, my colleagues or just my space in general. And it's that sort of like maybe tension that always exists in my mind that might, you know, weigh on me heavily throughout the day. And I don't know if that might, play into some of the thoughts that go through, some of other people's minds when they do, ultimately suffer something like a panic attack. Is it just a physical feeling, or is it spurred on by thoughts?
It could be whatever, there's no one way in to an anxious experience like a panic attack. I think what I've haven't mentioned, what might be helpful to kind of contextualize like anxiety versus maybe just like stress or nervousness, because there is a ton of overlap between all this. Often when we're talking about anxiety, we're talking about a fear response, often of something in the future, whether it's real or imaginary. But often when we're talking about an anxious experience, we can often point to a fear of what may happen. Now, the experience is present. If your thoughts are racing and your heart is pounding, you're experiencing that in the moment. But if we can point to what is this all about, oftentimes there is some sort of fear response about something that may or may not occur in the future. But again, that's different than, something more of a trauma response, where we're reliving, in a sense, something incredibly distressing that happened in the past. And again, that can create its own host of anxious responses as well.
And for you, Matt, how has that been? How would you deem, like, the times that you've had to struggle with anxiety? Where does that exactly kind of fall into what Jordan just described?
It's sort of morphed throughout the years, and it's been different at different times in my life, I would say. I certainly think that after becoming a father, certain things became a lot heavier to carry. Not only just in general, like the anxieties that may not have even been present, or like the anxieties that were a lot smaller, like were never a big deal, but the things that I hadn't necessarily really worked through properly or figured out properly became things that I really have wanted to focus on, because I want to be a really good example, as a dad, right? That's hugely important. I don't want to necessarily pass on these things, best that I can control that from happening. So it's become very important to me to figure out, okay, what's really going on. And for me, it's taken a long time to actually get, I think, the proper diagnosis. It took years, and really part of that was not necessarily working with the right people for what I was dealing with, because they just weren't trained to necessarily identify it properly. And then part of that was it hadn't really gotten to a point where it was affecting my daily life, like Jordan described, to where it was extremely disruptive. And there was no option. I needed to really do something about it and get to the bottom of it. And just to kind of round it out, for me, there's definitely, it all starts here for me, like in my mind, with ideas, with thoughts, with, it might be a very simple thing, might be nothing, might not be a big deal to most people. But to me, I can take something that's very small and I can think about it and I can continue spiraling all the way. I mean, if I don't get a hold of it, my mind will become just completely entangled with what was one small idea is now this gigantic, massive black hole of all sorts of potentially terrible things that could happen, that did happen, that haven't ever, been reality. But I think it's also important to say, like, through my work in therapy and through the process I was describing, I was able to actually kind of get the proper diagnosis, which ended up being a form of OCD. And a lot of people consider, I think, people who don't necessarily know about it, we hear about it here and there, but a lot of, at least for me, like I thought OCD was a more physical thing. As an example, like you see the cases where people need to check things, like they need to check the locks on their doors, or they flip light switches a certain amount of times, or they count how many times they take steps, or there's a lot of really like debilitating, awful things that people go through in regards to OCD that I've learned about through this process. And for me, it's not that type of OCD. It's more invisible. It's in my mind, and it's the process that I described, to where I think the best way to describe it would be most people have a spotlight, and this is something I learned in therapy, so I'm kind of sharing something to think about. And this sounds like you, then maybe you're struggling with something like this, and maybe go seek out some more information about OCD, because it might be helpful. But the way it was described to me was, most people have a spotlight on the things that they think about, and on the outside of that spotlight are some sort of fringe things that we may think about here and there. A terrible accident, something that's really intense but not likely to happen, and most of the time people can acknowledge, yeah, that would be terrible, or if this happened, that would suck, but they quickly forget about it and they stay within this small spotlight of things. Then there's people like me who just have a much wider spotlight, and those things that are typically fringe for most people are not necessarily fringe for me, and my mind will basically gravitate, or I should say my OCD will gravitate towards those topics, and then just extrapolate from there and create problems and try to find solutions. And so, going back to what we were talking about before, along with the therapy and the work I'm putting in, where, as you know, with BJJ, it's something that you could actually put that type of thinking into positively.
Mm.
And that's been part of, for me, the process in, why I am so, like, why I'm waving the flag for this new thing that I'm doing. Because if I am thinking about things that are not serving me, and if I'm not able to necessarily redirect into the present, which is always the goal, to be mindful and to practice mindfulness and to be present in your experience if you can, then the next best thing for me is to think about what happened today when I trained. What were the things that got me caught up and got me pinned, or that made me tap? What things did I do well? How can I do it better? And a whole other list of things. But I can spend, potentially hours thinking through those types of challenges, those types of problems, and finding solutions that are going to make me better at this new thing. And it's a much better use of that type of mindset than it is thinking about things that haven't happened, may never happen. It's, yeah. So,
Matt, apologies.
Yeah.
It does. And apologies if this is too personal, no pressure. But like, thinking back, did you relate to drumming in a similar way when you were younger? Because I know for me, drumming and playing like a loud distorted guitar as a child and a teen, that was a way in which I felt like I could positively direct a lot of energy. I didn't always have other ways to direct some of this energy, and energy is a way that I often conceptualize much of my experience, but certainly anxiety as well. So when there's like too much energy that's either stagnant or stuck, or there's not an ability for it to express itself, I typically experience anxiety, mostly physical anxiety, more recently as an adult. as a kid, if I could just like beat the shit out of a drum set, that was a way to get the energy to move and to express myself. At the time, I don't think I recognized that's what was happening in part. But with insight and therapy over the years, I've realized like that gave me a voice. That was a channel in which I felt safe and articulate to express what was inside of me. Matt, you're talking about something a bit different in just kind of your own mental activity and how you're able to direct that or not. But I'm wondering if any of this resonates.
It does, but I don't think I was aware of it as much at the time when I was younger, obviously. Like, I think it certainly scratched that itch without realizing that that's what it was doing for me. I knew I felt great when I played. I knew that I was obsessed with drumming. It was obviously the type of obsession that, you know, I was able to turn into a career, basically. And for me, I think having always had these qualities when it comes to anxiety, you know, just being a part of me, I imagine that yes, you know, the answer to your question is yes, that drumming certainly was something that gave me that type of physical outlet to physically and mentally exhaust me in those ways. It's just interesting because I don't know if I had found anything, at least not in the past 5 years, that had been able to do that as much as my newfound hobby, right? Which I have no ambitions to turn into a career by any means, like I did with drumming. But it's definitely something that I'm, as I think, obsessed with in a good way, as I was with drumming, especially when I was, you know, really cutting my teeth with that art form. And maybe that's why.
And I think, you know, we're talking about examples like drumming or jiu-jitsu here, but I mean, you know, hopefully if somebody's listening to this and they're looking for a similar thing, it doesn't have to be either of those two. It could be whatever, you know. The point is, we hope you find it. You know, it could be, I mean, for me at one time, it was like video editing, you know, it was like just, you know, being so consumed with this one thing that I could focus on and not really feel like time is passing slowly, that I ultimately made a career out of. So, you know, hopefully somebody, you know, if you're listening to this, you're looking for some sort of outlet. Hopefully you're able to, you know, think about what you're interested in and maybe try new things to find it. I wanted to talk a little bit more, you know, you touched on fatherhood. And, you know, while you were picking up jujitsu, I suppose I was picking up fatherhood as a recent dad. I certainly can understand now, you know, that struggle to want to be perfect, you know, for the example that you're about to set for somebody else. It makes me, you know, certainly think about like how I looked at my own parents, and maybe when I was younger, I was expecting them to, you know, holding them to a high standard of like what I think a parent should be. In order to graduate to become qualified as a parent, you must be, you know, blank. And as I've come to realize now at this point myself, nobody is ever at that level. We're all just humans, you know, and we just happen to, you know, be pushed into this role whenever our time is there. How did you kind of, you know, I imagine it's still ongoing, but how did you kind of at least reach some sort of resolution in dealing with some of those tensions that you might have had?
I mean, I'm still working through it, but in terms of how to model myself as a parent, it's really just something that I think Jordan will appreciate me saying is trying to be kind to myself and not hold myself to these really crazy standards because of what you just said, Wai. Like, we are human. We are going to make mistakes. There's no question about that. We're never going to be the perfect model. Even if we are, our children are still individuals that are going to have their own experiences and make their own mistakes. And we might not be equipped to deal with them no matter how great we strive to be. So I think learning to kind of roll with it and do your best and not judge yourself too harshly is really the thing that is going to help to at least keep you moving in the right direction with it. At least that's what I found, because there's nothing, you know, there's no rule book. There's nothing out there really until you experience it that prepares you to be a parent, let alone a good parent. It's very challenging. And the only thing you can do is just follow your moral compass and try to, like you said, reflect on the things that you appreciated as a parent or as a kid with your own parents. And if there's places where you can model exactly like them because they did a great job, then do that because you have that example. Or if there's things that they did that maybe you think you can modify, do that. But I don't think that there's much benefit in beating yourself up about things that you do or don't do perfectly, because you're never going to be. And I think that right there is probably more likely to be something that a young child will notice to some degree, or at least feel and take that on, as opposed to the ability to sort of roll with the punches. And that's definitely the goal, right? Is to have to raise raise children that are able to kind of literally, like, you know, deal with things in a way where they're not, you know, beating themselves up figuratively.
When you mention learning to roll with it, I mean, what you're talking about is acceptance in large part. And as a young teen, I worked with different therapists. Looking back, I don't really remember like one conversation or intervention that really made a significant difference. Maybe, you know, as far as maintenance, it was helpful in preventing things from getting worse. But looking back all those years ago, there is one conversation I remember having on a phone, and I remember exactly where I was with some mental health professional, couldn't tell you who, but he explained it to me in this way of like, when we're feeling anxiety, or when we're feeling anything that's uncomfortable, our instinct is to fight it because it's something we don't like. So let's get rid of it. And how do we get rid of something? It's by fighting it. Now, other people, they may deny it, ignore it, numb it, etc. But often with anxiety, what we do is we might have an anxious thought, and then we start having more uncomfortable thoughts about the fact that, oh my God, I'm having this thought right now. And then we start kind of freaking out. Then the heart rate starts going, you know, the body lights up. And because the body's lighting up, well, then our mind is interpreting, oh shit, we're in danger. And it becomes this cycle. So what was so transformative for me to hear as a kid was, instead of having this instinct to just fight against the anxiety, what if you tried to just befriend it? And what he meant by that was like literally communicating to what's happening within us. So, you know, I learned how to talk to myself, like, you know, not out loud, but internally, like, oh, there's that anxiety again. Like, I see you. It's okay. Like, if you're here, like, fine, hang out. And it was learning this different strategy to relating to these inner forces within me that allowed me to realize, if I don't feed into it, it's not going to have much to play with anymore. And so by welcoming the discomfort or the anxiety, in a sense, that depowered it. And that literally changed my life and the ways in which I was able to relate to myself, because I didn't start to fear or try to defend against or fight against everything that was happening within my mind and body that felt uncomfortable. When we do that, we are creating more tension. We are creating more pressure and more stress, which often or ultimately will lead to more anxiety. So acceptance, like, this is what's happening. Okay, let's, like, we can still deal with it, but let's at least like try to accept that these are the conditions right now and not create more tension or friction internally.
Can I just make an observation at this point, Jordan,
Please.
which is that I think what we've said so far, the four of us, and from what I'm seeing in the chat room as well, really speaks to the breadth of this subject and how it can manifest in so many different ways, and the different triggers in one's lives that may be responsible for it, and the different coping mechanisms. I mean, I see mention in the chat of generalized anxiety disorder, which a close relative of mine deals with. And it goes back to something that you were talking about earlier, Matt, or touching on at least, which is the getting caught up in a particular feeling and it's snowballing. And I see it referred to occasionally as catastrophic thinking or catastrophizing.
Yeah.
The person I'm talking about in my life often uses the example of, and this is such a simple thing. In my part of the world, we still rely on heating oil quite a lot in the winter. So a lot of houses have a tank at the back for kerosene, which fires the central heating. And if you require a delivery, they generally come in a big truck full of oil, So this person can't sleep the night before for the thought that the truck will arrive and crash in to the house. And in the full knowledge that that is not a rational expectation or a realistic outcome, but can't shake that feeling, can't sleep. Then the next day, even after it's over, there are problems with concentration. So it's an incredibly broad range of experiences that people have, from what I described of social anxiety, which is more about interacting with people, panic attacks, the catastrophic thinking, all of these things. And I think one of my takeaways is that there's more than one way to deal with this, whether it's, Matt has this tremendous outlet that he's found in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. For me, I got the most benefit, I think, from therapy, which was exploring things in my past that were probably re-manifesting post my 20s that I sort of managed to, like, we're all different, but in my teens, I was able to blow off a lot of that kind of stuff. And at college, I was fine as well. It was really after that, when I entered the world of work properly for the first time, and real life and rent and all of those things, that it began to manifest most for me. And I couldn't get to the bottom of it without some help in exploring some past issues that, may have been bubbling back up to the surface.
I'm wondering, Jordan, should we go to calls at this point?
Yeah, let's do that. And then maybe we can spend a bit of time maybe talking a bit more about beyond jiu-jitsu and things like that, like other ways in which we found it helpful to kind of cope with these things, whether it's just a typical anxiety or something a bit more upsetting.
Okay, let's go to some calls. Some people have been waiting for a long time, even before we started here. So you can find the link right now in the chat room on the YouTube, or in the show description, or in the email if you received it through your Patreon email. A number of ways to be able to find the StreamYard link. But let's first go here to Mario. Mario, you are on. Welcome to the Wellness Policy. Oh, you might be muted.
Hey guys,
there we go.
Good to hear you. Good to see you.
Hey, Mario.
I've really enjoyed the discussion thus far. A lot of the things that I was like, man, I wish I could ask this. You guys have already answered. So, yeah, the anxiety thing is a mofo, to say the least. And kind of an open-ended question I wanted to leave to you guys is those thoughts and those kind of all-encompassing emotions. Neal, you talked about it as catastrophizing. What are some things that, if each one of you want to touch on, how do you manage to interrupt that signal? for me, I've had to manage creating space and distance between those thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and my actions, or how my body, how it manifests in my body. Could you guys maybe touch on that a little bit?
Yeah. Thanks, Mario, and
Thank you,
good to see you
Mario.
again, brother.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mario, it kind of alluding to what I was talking about before, that oftentimes when we have an anxious response, whether in our thinking, in physically, emotionally, it creates this cycle. So what's often helpful is to find a way or multiple ways in which we can interrupt the cycle. Often, for me, as I've shared many times on this show, developing a practice of meditation has been transformative in my life and mental well-being. And when I'm able to do that, that is, at least for me, a way to create distance between the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, and my ability to simply just observe my experience a bit more objectively. When I'm talking about these things, I'm often talking about the difference between more unconsciously reacting. So I have an anxious thought, and maybe then it creates a heart racing, and then I'm unconsciously reacting with an anxious behavior. I don't do this, but many people might start biting their nails, for instance. Then they look at the nails, and it's like, they're getting anxious about the fact that they're doing that anxious behavior, and the cycle goes on. So when we're able to create distance, I speak in the language of we're not unconsciously reacting to a situation in any given moment, but we're now more intentionally or consciously responding to our experience in the moment. So for me, some sort of mindfulness practice that I've developed and strengthened through more specific meditation styles throughout my life, that has allowed me the skill to just simply take a step back, no matter how I as I've shared in a prior episode. My dad had some health issues recently, and like, it was so fucking intense for me emotionally, where I'm bawling my eyes out. But even as I'm in that experience, there's times in which I'm also able to just simply witness the experience that I'm having. And in that way, the emotional overwhelm isn't leading to much more perhaps unnecessary fear or panic about the fact that the real conditions of my life in that moment are truly upsetting and overwhelming.
Thank you for sharing that, Jordan. Thank you, Mario. Appreciate the call very much. I wonder. So you're talking about kind of dissociating and maybe like compartmentalizing that part of you feeling anxiety. In the corner while you kind of carry on. Is that what I'm kind of?
If I can put, I don't like the word dissociate, because that leads me to think that there still is not a real presence of what's occurring in the moment. When I think dissociate, I'm thinking more of like a psychological splitting of sorts. So there's still a presence and an ability to connect with what's happening, but it's more like I'm taking the wheel of my own car instead of it driving the car for me, without me having much control over where we're headed.
You're not ignoring it. You're talking to it.
I'm with it.
You're with it.
Yeah.
But let's go up next to Steve. Steve grows weed. Welcome to the Wellness Policy.
How's it going, guys? It's been a
Matt,
really good episode.
meet Steve grows weed.
What's up, man?
How's it going, Matt?
Good,
really
thanks.
impressed with everything you were saying and how you were like putting your stuff into perspective. It's really cool. I don't think I have. I mean, you said you just talking about the fingernail biting. I do that, but I find I do it when I'm watching a movie or something, or driving. So I don't know if I not necessarily get anxious, but I do have anxious habits, I guess. But like, I don't necessarily think I have anxiety the way some people get it. Like, I've had a panic attack before, but I have several people in my life that go through pretty bad anxiety. And whether it's driving anxiety, social anxiety, ones that aren't even identified. And I end up trying to be like the Rock, and it's hard because I get told by the people while they're going through their panic attacks, it's like, you don't understand. And it's like, I don't. Like, I'll be quite honest, I don't understand. But I can still empathize and relate to what's going on in some kind of way, or just try to be there. But it's hard. It's hard to be the person as well that has to be on the other side, trying to like look at this person and what they're going through, and when you're, and like they're having this like panic moment, and you are just watching the situation going, there's no problem here, and it's really hard to like understand. Like, it's not hard to be understanding, but like it's hard to wrap your head around what's going on. It's like something that seems so simple sometimes is like so monumental to that person that's going through it, right? And it's it's really crazy to see. Like, it's like, because I've like seen so many people with it, it's like I really try to connect with it as much as, and learn as much as I can about it, because, and even though I don't go through it, I have to be a person who has to be there for somebody who does, for several people who do. So, and what you were saying about the future stuff, and that's how I think about it. I've said that to people. It's like the anxiety is like about what is going to happen. It's never about what's going on right now, or rarely about what's going on right now. It's about the thought of what could happen or what will happen in the future. In the future, I am going to have to go through this, and this is destroying me because I don't want to go through such and such a thing, right? So yeah, it's hard to wrap my head around, but I do my best.
Yeah. Do you guys mind if I respond?
Please. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's people in my life that have taken that role that you're describing, and it's very hard for them to wrap their head around exactly what you're saying. Like the things that haven't happened yet, and they don't seem like as anywhere near as big of a deal to them as they are to me. The concerns don't really make sense because there is nothing happening in the moment. It's not like, I've learned it's not something that I should ever. How do I word this? I guess the point that I'm trying to make is, for me, if I were talking to you, right, as the person who is there to listen, I think something that would be good for you to know, and something that may make you feel better about this, despite not being able to relate, is that oftentimes, just for me, having the chance to express and talk through and share what I'm saying, or I'm sorry, what I'm thinking about, what is tormenting me, helps to get it out of my head. And you simply just being there as a listener and as a supporter, and more so as someone who is maybe able to very politely, very gently help to guide that person back into the present, is probably the best thing you can do. Not to say that, like, giving reassurance to you may seem like the right thing, but by giving reassurance to somebody who's afraid of a particular thing isn't going to help them. It's just not going to work. It doesn't work. Telling them that everything is okay just doesn't work. But I think, one, listening, and then two, maybe trying to guide them into a hands-on activity that you guys could do together, especially in the moment, to get them out of it. It can be anything. It can be drink a glass of water. Let's go splash some water on our face. Let's go for a walk. Let's play cards. Let's I don't know. Let's go look at a rock collection and talk about. It literally can be anything that is hands-on, physical. If you're inside, go outside. Take the person and say, "Come on, let's go. Let's get out. Let's go for a drive." But something that helps them to like physically get out of their head and into what is in front of them, will help. So listen first. And I think, and Jordan, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a professional in this area. But I think the biggest thing as a listener, along with just letting someone talk, is gauging if there is a real problem, if there's a real threat in that moment. Like if someone is saying, I'm in such a bad place that I'm going to harm myself, right? Then that's something where, again, Jordan, I'm going to defer to you, but like you may want to take action on that person's behalf or encourage them while you're with them to take action to stop them from going down that path of harm. If it is in that going in that direction. Like that's the only other thing I would say that, to do, so to speak, aside from listening, and then hopefully try to redirect them into something, again, hands-on, if that makes sense. Jordan?
Yeah, agreed completely. I think the key takeaway from what you just shared, Matt, is our ability, again, to be able to express what's within us instead of keeping it in. Because when we keep it in, it's swirling, it's hard to make sense. It's a very lonely place to be, especially if it's uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. And again, expression, yeah, if we can talk about it, great, with someone who is supportive and a good listener and not judgmental, that's wonderful. Maybe sometimes we don't have the words to say, so it can be another form of expression, whether it's more physical, like the jujitsu, or playing an instrument, or doing a puzzle, or working out. Maybe it can be more verbal, but not social. So we're literally just brain dumping by journaling or typing out what comes to mind. Maybe it's a bit more abstract and artistic, like we're just writing poetry or being more covert in what we're describing. But the point is that we're able to express whatever energy is within us. And the second point that you made, Matt, is accessing the present moment. Because again, when we're stuck in our heads with anxious thoughts, or it's typically not in the present. We can't necessarily touch that or feel that or even confirm it. Most of our thoughts are not true. Most of our thoughts are not accurate. But Matt, it was helpful for you to describe the idea of kind of like the window or the triangle, where for a lot of people, most of those thoughts that are not true or accurate or helpful, we just disregard them.
Yeah.
But for some people, especially people that are a bit more anxious, they will latch on to those and follow wherever they may lead. And that can often become a slippery slope for us. So yeah, expression and accessing the present moment. If you're inside, like go outside, because that's literally changing the environment. And when we start shifting things around of what we're experiencing externally, it's a lot easier for things internally to also adjust to something a bit more helpful for us.
Could I go back to something as well that Steve mentioned about not quite understanding, being there, wanting to be the rock and wanting to be there for your loved ones who are experiencing these things. I think as someone, and I'll defer to the others, but I'm kind of betting on this. As someone who's experienced anxiety to what I would consider a clinical level in the past, I didn't really understand it either. And yet, when a real, genuine crisis occurs in the moment, I am not blowing my own horn by saying I'm very good at dealing with those things and snapping into, right, okay, these are the actions that need taken. And an unpleasant, the most unpleasant example, a couple of years ago, my uncle died unexpectedly, and he was the youngest of my mother's siblings and so on. But I was kind of the one who had to immediately deal with the news, how to break it to certain other members of the family. And I was able to do all of that and kind of think very logically in that moment. However, the thought of that happening in the future would have sent me spinning probably. So I wonder if that's the case with, can I ask you, Matt, I mean, are you that kind of person as well, that perhaps future thoughts and so on, it's difficult to get a handle on, but when something actually happens in the moment, are you one of those people who's rather good actually at dealing with things?
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think so. And maybe it's because, to some degree, I've thought through all these different scenarios, and when you think about the worst thing happening, or at least for someone with anxiety, oftentimes what's occurring physically in their bodies is the result of imagining a scenario and what it will be like, and you imagine all the bad feelings, all the the way you're going to feel, the way this is going to impact you, what it's going to do, all these things. And for the most part, I would say when something, bad does happen right in front of you, right in front of me, you're not really thinking in the moment. You're in it. You're present.
Yes.
Right. And I think that is the differentiator right there. You're not giving yourself, you don't have a chance to think about how bad it is or how bad it may be. You just have to do. And that's, again, going back to sort of what Jordan and I were talking about, of like doing something hands-on in the present that requires your full attention. And, there's no room for the anxious thought, because you have to take action. And I want to be careful too. I don't mean to say that by walking outside or by changing your behavior from thinking to doing something, that you're avoiding what is happening, and that you're getting away from it, not to address it later. It's more so, this is a way to stop the cycle. This is a way to put a wedge in things and get back to a place of hopefully calm presence, so that you're able to figure out how to address it properly. Because for me, again, there was no option. Like, I needed to address these things, and I still am dealing with them, and I'm still addressing them every day. But I also need to employ mindfulness and activities to make sure that I'm not living and spending all of my time thinking about these things. So there's a difference between avoidance and then sort of bringing yourself back to the present, while still working on, the issues. Does that make sense? I'm describing it.
I'm curious, especially while we have, Steve around here. There's through my experience with people who've suffered from anxiety, some of them have dealt with it through substances, whether it be marijuana. Somebody in the chat room is asking about, microdosing mushrooms, or it could be something, a drug that, might be prescribed. I'm curious if any of you guys in the room have anything to kind of speak of, because a lot of the solutions we're talking about are more, like activities and things that we can do. But what about substances?
It's all dependent. I think the important thing is that we have opportunities, perhaps professional support, obviously, if it's something prescribed, but to be able to check ourselves honestly and ask, what is this doing for me? I say that because I'm someone who, cannabis has changed my life for the better. Cannabis, when I was in my early 20s, it gave me access to myself intellectually, creatively, emotionally, spiritually, which I just did not have access to. I since then haven't needed to be intoxicated to have access to it again, but it opened doors for me. Also around that time, I was smoking weed mostly every day, oftentimes by myself, even though it started as a social thing. for like a year and a half. And my mom was very kind and kind of like checking me hard one day and being like, what is this? And that was all I needed to kind of break that habit and realize, oh, I've been very depressed. I don't have much vision for the direction of my life. And cannabis turned into a way to cope through avoidance. When I got high, I didn't necessarily feel as much anxiety because it allowed me to avoid real discomfort and real anxiety, much of which was probably healthy for me because it was my body's alarm clock or system going off saying like, yo, shit's not working. Pay attention and figure out a solution. And for a good while, smoking weed minimized that tension, which allowed me to punt the responsibility of my life. When I was much younger, I was on prescribed medications, more traditional antidepressants. Were they helpful? I don't know. What I remember was it was hard to cry. And I remember times as a kid feeling like I really want to cry, but I can't. And as an adult, I have, even in times of great anxiety, I've tried to not use those medications. I'm not saying that anyone else should follow my lead. That's just been for me personally. I've found those types of medications to be incredibly helpful and beneficial for other people. What I would offer, though, is that if you're taking a medication of some kind, perhaps do that in concert with something like a more traditional psychotherapy. So instead of just taking the medication to relieve symptoms, maybe try other modalities that help you develop other coping skills or that help you explore in ways that maybe get under the hood of yourself to maybe develop insight as to what's actually going on and why it might make sense to be struggling in the ways you might be struggling. So again, it's to each their own. Two people can take the same substances and have totally different relationships to it. And that's why just our own ability to be more objective and responsible is the key.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, please.
I find that, like you said, it's very situational. I know a lot of people who their anxiety, like a lot of people's anxiety, centers around being in control and needing to be in control. And all of a sudden you smoke some weed or take a substance and you no longer feel in control. So all of a sudden that changes everything for you. And so it makes the anxiety go way up, where it's like there's some people where, and maybe that's why I don't have anxiety, but it's like where it just puts me where I need to be, you know. And I mean, you know, I've done other things like substances in the past, like things like mushrooms and stuff where, and yeah, like maybe doing that, like I'm very interested in the microdosing because I think that is a really cool thing for people to explore, like in a proper, like legal way. But yeah, I think it's very situational. I think it's very case by case. Some people, I think it'd be great. It puts them right where they need to be. It calms them down. It quiets the mind. Where other people, it will just send them into that tailspin where it's just like, oh my God, I'm not in control anymore. And then that anxiety becomes the issue, right? So
yeah, typically it is about control. It's about being able to control the future, right? Yeah. Control the situation that hasn't happened and how am I going to handle it and what's this going to be? And that's that. I'm trying to think of the exact quote that's in my therapist's office, but it's anxiety isn't necessarily being afraid of the future. It's being afraid of not being able to control the future. And it's just something that we'll never have full control over no matter what we do. And that's,
even you talking about being in it, like how everything's cool when you're in it. I've seen that firsthand as well, where people that, like, you know, they have a parenting thing where it's like what if there's an emergency situation and I'm not able to care for my kids the way I need to, but then something comes up in that kind of way, and I've seen them just turn all that off, anything, because like you said, when you're in the moment, all that goes away because you don't have a chance to think too much about it. You're acting, you're doing what you need to do. So it's like it's almost funny because it's like you spend so much time worrying about it, but then you kind of see yourself in those situations where it's like, and you do everything exactly the way you should, but at the same time, when all that's over, that fear and all those things still come back, that it's not a reassurance always, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry.
Oftentimes the more reassurance you get, the less you're actually dealing with it. You're like, the more like, acceptance is huge, exposure is huge, and those are things that, like, if you have reassurance, you're not giving yourself a chance to accept things, or again, expose yourself to the fears, because the more you can learn to live with them and be with them, as Jordan is saying, but make the voices softer, not as loud, make the the obsession smaller, whatever it is, like, that is the goal, instead of taking a dose of reassurance that only helps it go away for a second, or fighting against it, trying to avoid it, which is only going to make matters just worse. So
sorry for cutting you off there.
No, you're good. Sorry.
I know Matt's very short in time, and we have gone a bit longer than maybe we wanted, but thank you so much, Steve. Always appreciate the calls.
Thanks, Steve.
Cheers, guys.
Jordan, I know there's something you wanted to talk about before getting out of here, right? Or at least to carry on the conversation before taking calls.
I mentioned just modalities, but I mean, in the conversations we've had, we've touched on a lot of the different ways in which we've learned how to cope with some of this stuff. Maybe just like rapid fire, Wai and Neal. I'm wondering, starting with you, Wai, like, when you just think of activities you do or things you've done throughout your life, even if you're not feeling like overwhelmed incredibly by anxiety, but just what are things that you have naturally found yourself doing that help create more presence or more connection with yourself and others that could be helpful for other people experiencing anxiety?
Well, I'm of the personality that, like, if I'm thinking about something, I really want to, for lack of a better word, try to solve it in my head. And a lot of these things you simply can't. But, for instance, I was going through, like, really rough, like, my first serious, like, breakup, for instance. And I was the initiator. And, that was probably, like, one of the more, sort of, like, anxious sort of moments of my entire life, is just deciding, you're at a fork in the road in the relationship. Do you go one way or do you go the other? Do I commit or do I not? And it's those moments that were very high pressure. And at that point, like, in those moments, I remember really seeking knowledge and seeking sort of, like, advice from either whether it be friends or maybe a video on YouTube that might be a bit more aligned with, like, my current mindset at the moment. And you find one, and then I think having a bit of an understanding of, like, the thoughts and feelings that you're going through, why you're feeling the way you are, that's helped me in the past. When it comes to, like, simply knowing what I'm dealing with, but not being able to relax, I do what I enjoy. Playing music for sure is definitely one of those things. Watching YouTube videos about, like, Lego movie, like, reviews or whatever. Like, that's another way I tend to cope.
Or when I think of you, I think just building Lego. I mean, talk about something that's super
working with your hands,
focused. Yeah, like the physicality of it. You're following directions, and you're, like, fully immersed. Like, that is where the full focus of your attention is in an activity like that. And I'd imagine when you do that, you enter some sort of flow state, and you're not consumed with yourself, especially in ways that can be overwhelming and uncomfortable.
Yeah, totally. Especially when you're free building and not necessarily even following instructions, thinking about what fits with the pieces that you have, that it's a lot more encompassing than following the instructions. But yeah, I definitely recommend it. In fact, Lego is kind of marketing themselves towards adults as a sort of, like, a meditative sort of experience these days.
Many things are. I think that's a good sign, though, because it's an understanding more culturally that to take care of our mental health is actually important, and there's many ways to do that. Neal, what about you? What comes to mind when you think of these kind of self-care activities?
I find one of the simplest things that helps me is to change my location. And I just mean go outdoors if I'm indoors. Sometimes if you're stuck in an office, that's not, during working hours, that's not an easy thing to do. Thankfully, that's not something I need to deal with that much these days. But just going somewhere else, and as I've learned more sort of practical techniques that have a grounding in evidence, stuff that's going to sound weird, like digging my hands into the soil in the garden, literally grounding in that way. Taking a beat, which is just, I feel like Matt has said, is not avoidance, but just pumping the brakes a little, which is, paying attention to your breathing, to your body, putting your hand over your heart and just taking some very deliberate contemplative breaths. And some techniques that you've helped me with, Jordan, very recently, in fact, where I got caught up in something, and mentally, and you just gave me a very quick piece of advice, which was I had said you, and this feels an absurd thought, and you said to me, well, trust the part of you that says this is absurd and acknowledge and thank the other part, the other thoughts, and sort of send them on their way, almost, befriend them, thank them, And I know to some people listening, this might sound like hippy dippy stuff or whatever, but it helps. It works, really, really does. And some of these things are fairly simple, some less so, some will require intervention, therapy, maybe even medication. I'm coming from a pretty good place these days. So those are just some simple things that seem to work for me.
Yeah, very good. Quickly, Mario in the StreamYard chat who joined us earlier, just mentioning doing things that increase our presence, often referred to as grounding techniques. Again, this is us getting more out of our head and into our bodies in ways that are present moment focused and not threatening. So, if noticing what you can smell or taste or hear or see. Again, the idea being that these are more objective or just neutral or pleasant sensations in the moment, then that can help pull us out of something that feels more distressing and where we don't feel we have as much control over. I want to respect Matt's time. I also want to plug a few things for him because I'd imagine he'd be, that's not what he's here to do, clearly. But I saw we have a super chat if you want to pull that up. I think of just appreciation way.
Yeah, this one comes from Stefan, who sent $5 just to say this is such an important topic, and I'm really glad you're all having this conversation with us. And he also says, I built Gundam models, but I imagine the principle is the same as Lego. We also have Jeff Schumann, just as while we're going through some of these comments here, he says, music listening, doing something physical, and mindfulness come together for me in listening to vinyl, as you have to get up every 20 minutes and flip sides. So
good point.
Wonderful suggestion there.
I like that. In Discord, discord.com/post wrestling, there's a wellness policy channel or thread or whatever the fuck we call it in Discord. A few in there. I'll read one question briefly from Snapcat, asking the differences between an anxiety attack and a panic attack. The DSM, which is the manual we use in at least my country of diagnoses and psychological disorders, we don't recognize the term anxiety attack, although many others do. Panic attack and panic disorder are recognizable terms. We discussed that earlier. Very intense, often for maybe 10 minutes or briefer period in time. Feeling like things are out of control. You might die. Very physical. Where an anxiety attack can be, from some definitions, can last, for years. I don't like the term attack, to be honest. I think language matters. I once worked with a therapist who preferred the term anxiety or panic episode. And that resonated with me at the time because it felt literally less threatening. Attack is a pretty intense term. So for the others that shared sentiments there, we appreciate you and we'll respond to you in Discord. Matt, he's a drummer. His band is Periphery. I'll do this for you, Matt, because again, you are not here for other, you're here to share your experience about this. I know you're here to not promote anything. But Matt's band Periphery, they have a new album coming out March 10th. It's their 5th album. Djent is not a genre. Indeed, I suppose, Matt. They've released 2 songs, 2 singles thus far, and both a traditional video for one and a guitar playthrough released today, hours ago, for the other single. I say this genuinely. I love your new music, Matt, and congratulations on it.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you dig it. Yeah.
Matt's band Periphery will be going on tour beginning March 3rd. I will be at that date in Maryland, closer to DC. I look forward to it. They'll be out for a full month with the band Under Oath. I believe the only connection to pro wrestling is that Under Oath's single On My Teeth was the official theme of NXT TakeOver 25. How do we feel about this, Matt?
I think if you're happy, I'm happy.
When is Periphery getting one of those, pro wrestling paychecks?
I don't know. You guys might have to help us with that.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, if you got any ideas, let me know.
Wai Ting 25 was the Cowboy Wai Ting sign event.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, look at that. Are you coming through Toronto, Matt?
No, we'll be just domestic on this one.
Okay, well then maybe Wai will have to get out the passport and put on the old cowboy hat and come see you in the States.
I'd love to. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah. I'd bring my drummer along with me too, who's a huge fan of yours. So absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll be check the dates. Maybe there's something that works that's close to you.
Matt, before we hop off, anything else that you want to express?
No, I just want to say thank you for having me on. Thank you for shedding light on such an important topic that hopefully can help a lot of people. And thank you for the genuine plug of the music and so forth. It's our 6th album, not our 5th, but it's a little tricky.
But it's called Periphery 5.
Yeah, we threw in a little cheeky one in the midst of it. So in the midst of all the chronology, there's
WWE math. I think you're already on your way.
Yeah, there we go. Right, there we go. That might help.
5th anniversary.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, but no, thank you guys. This was great, and I really appreciate it.
Very cool. So I've been enjoying the watching on YouTube all the different reaction videos to your song Wildfire. Perhaps this week Neal could share his own reaction video to Periphery's Wildfire. So we look forward to that. Wai, do you want to take this thing home?
Yeah. So last time was the first time we tried this on a StreamYard. I'm going to try to talk up to the post. Thank you for joining. Oh, I missed it. Anyway, goodbye, everybody.
Is this happening right now?
Bye-bye.